It says in this week's parsha that, last week's parsha. I'm confusing Vayakil Pekude with just Pekude. So Shabbos isn't mentioned in this week's parsha, it was last week. Most years Vayakil and Pekude are read together. So when we get to Pekude, we also mention keeping Shabbos. Moshe Rabbeinu told the people before building the Mishkan, remember, keep Shabbos. You're allowed to work, but Shabbos is more important. The seventh day you do no work. Now here's how you build the Mishkan. And that reflects what God told Moshe Rabbeinu, all these mitzvahs about building a Mishkan, and they told him, Aches Shabbathothay Tishmoru. But don't forget to keep Shabbos. This is one commandment which is not overridden by the Sabbath. The Sabbath takes precedence. So it's kind of interesting. What else takes precedence over the Sabbath? Well, Bris Milah, for example, and the actual service of the temple. There's someone who, Yom Kippur fell out on Shabbos, and he shechted an animal, and he burnt it, and he did all these other melachas on Shabbos. His name was Kohen Gadol. So he does quite a few melachas on Yom Kippur. What anybody else would do would be considered a desecration of both the Sabbath and of Yom Kippur. But when he does it, it's considered a righteous deed, and it actually atones for all of Israel. So that should be a lesson for the rest of us. It's important to know it's only through the proper study of the Torah does one understand when to apply certain principles over others. If I didn't know any better, I would have said, okay, well, Sabbath should always override things. Or, no, I found that Sabbath is overridden in so many cases. Basically, anything that, let's say, I would deem important should override the Sabbath. That's what I felt driving down here past an institution where they're telling us, bring them home or whatever, something about the captives. It says, quote from the Rambam, there's no mitzvah greater, no greater commandment than the redemption of captives. And they don't really listen to the rest of what the Rambam says, but the Rambam adds a big caveat that you can't pay more than a fair price, and not in times of war, etc. Well, all the rest of it's lost on them. If you pick and choose your Torah, or you just stress one principle over all the others without knowing how to balance them. By the way, who is the great prophet, so to speak, the spokesman for proper balance in everything in our lives? Rambam, right? Everything, you have to strike a proper balance. So let's study more of this Torah so we could know how to balance ourselves. So those of you who are keeping score at home, we're on the 74th page, the second folio, Ayin Daled Omid Beis of Tractate Shabbat, Masechet Shabbos. What line were we up to, or what do we want to know about? You're talking about pegs, right? The case was this fellow basically cooked a peg. We saw that there's various opinions out there how the laws of cooking and changing things through heat governs what we call kalim. And we saw that basically, if we read Rashi and Tosfos, the problem with this peg, with putting this peg into the oven, is that technically speaking, if the intention and the actual resulting action was only that the peg gets hardened through being put in this oven, then it wouldn't be an act of cooking. But the problem is that the peg goes through a softening stage, and that is the act of cooking. And we also saw, I mentioned this, that the Rambam holds otherwise, that it doesn't matter if you're hardening or softening anything through heat, it's all considered a Melacha. Let's read the next line of the Gemara. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, it says, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Haiman de artach kufra chayav mishum mevashel. Artach means lehartiach, means to boil something. In this case, means to melt. What's kufra? Kufra is just the Aramaic form of the Hebrew word kofer. Kofer is pitch. So where do you get pitch from? What do we use? Why do we boil pitch or melt it? So you can spread it on something. Nowadays, most of the time, the pitch that we use is for asphalt in roads, right? So while the pitch is hot, that's the tar component. So you put in some gravel in there, then you steamroller it and you let it cool and dry, and then you have a road that lasts, depending on your weather conditions, it could last for quite a while. So he's talking about someone here who's trying to melt some pitch. Why would he be doing it? That doesn't really matter. He's guilty. Chayav mishum vashel. So this is an act of cooking, not a food. Pitch is a substance, and it's not a kli, by the way. It's a substance. It hasn't been formed into a kli. And if he was using it the way we would use it, he's using it to coat a kli. We use it on roads, but it's still wrong to do this on Shabbos. Pshita, Isn't this obvious? This is of course, this is a prohibition a person has just violated. Mahu dithema, what would you have said? Kevan dehadar v'kusha ema lo. You know what happens to the pitch afterwards? Even though you're boiling it now and you're melting it, eventually it'll cool off and solidify once again. So the act of cooking, whatever act of cooking you're doing to it, will eventually wear off. Okay? You're going to see that. By the way, they could have said this about water. I've checked this out. You boil water and then you let it sit for a while, it'll go back to its original state of being not boiling, right? So, but then again, boiling water hasn't really changed its state. You see, boiling water is liquid, and when it cools off, it is still liquid. Here, the chiddush was that the act of cooking was so negated by what naturally happened that the pitch re-solidified. So you would have said that this wasn't the real act of cooking. Nothing has been accomplished. It's all been undone on its own. Just give it time. Kamash Balan, not that way. Kamash Balan, even though it's true that most pitch, if you let it sit there, it will re-solidify. The act that he does of melting this pitch is still an act of cooking on Shabbos. I remember speaking to a caterer back in the New York area. This must have been well more than 20 years ago. They used to have a dish that they served as a dessert on Shabbos, is a hot chocolate cake, which they would serve with ice cream. So the caterer would take it out of the whatever device he's using to keep the little cakes hot, quickly serve it on the plate, throw on a scoop of cold ice cream, and that tasted really good together, the hot chocolate cake and the cold ice cream. And the OU and other organizations put a stop to this. Why? They said sometimes they put the ice cream directly on the hot cake, and that causes an act of cooking. Davar gush. Remember? You take something that's really solid, has mass, and it's very hot, and you put on something else that cooks easily, then that is accomplishing an act of cooking on Shabbos. If you were to take, let's say, I don't know anybody here, I think I might be the only person left in the universe who sometimes makes par of chillent, but a big heat.
My daughter does.
Yeah, okay, well, that's what happened. We get influenced by vegetarians, we go off the derech. So you take your par of chillent, you can't put a slice of cheese on top of the chillent right when it's in the bowl. It will melt the cheese very easily. So they hold that that is an act of cooking on Shabbos. So they put a stop to this, even though no one wants the ice cream necessarily to melt. You don't want your ice cream to do that, but apparently it tastes good. The contrasting flavors, and you put them right together. So that's not what you want. And they no longer do this. Yes, sir. Yeah. So sometimes your cheese isn't cooked in the state of cheese. And by the way, there's another thing we have to mention. The cheese has not been cooked in the state of cheese. It might have been pasteurized when it was milk, but it hasn't been cooked now. Secondly, ein bishul achar bishul, as the Rambam points out, is not a heter. It is not a dispensation for the rule. It means that a person will not be hit with a liability for recooking something that has been cooking, but it's still forbidden. Pater aval aser, not mutter. Okay? Make sense? Yeah. So you have to watch out. Well, yeah. Yes. Yes, it would have allowed it. If the cakes were not hot, that they were yatsa lettuce, or you could actually see that they're causing a rapid change in the ice cream, they would have allowed that. Eating ice cream with room temperature cake is still permissible. That's what they allowed. They served this, by the way, it wasn't even real ice cream. We're dealing with some fake parv stuff, which is, in my belief, is more sacrilegious than eating parv cholent. These cholent parv, what? Yeah, no, I'll explain why.
Okay.
What?
When you have guests.
Yeah.
For Shabbat, especially if you.
Hosting guests or eating guests? No, you have guests for Shabbat. Okay. The way you said it was a little ambiguous. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're hosting guests who potentially can become dati.
Okay.
Okay. You want to make them as comfortable as possible. Okay. So a lot of these young ladies, huh? We're sent from Hebrew University.
Okay.
My kids live in that area.
Yes.
To come for Shabbat, to know what Shabbat means.
Okay.
And that is the reason. She had a flight control and a parlor.
Okay. Fine.
So.
Is there a question to this?
No, I'm just stating.
Why would you do such a thing?
Huh?
Why would you do such a thing? Why would you make a par of cholent? To cater to those people who aren't going to eat. Yeah. So yeah, we fell into this trap a few times. We've had vegetarian Shabbases, in order to accommodate our guests. Yeah. So one of the tricks I developed was keep everything parv except for the one pot that has that which is fleshik inside. So my contention is that parv cholent is not as bad as parv ice cream. Why? Because the parv cholent, right next to it, there's a pot of just meat or chicken or whatever you want, and you could put that into your cholent, no problem, and it tastes just the same. You combine them while they're hot, as long as they're both served hot. However, the parv ice cream, you can't pour milk onto your parv ice cream and say now it'll taste just as good as actual ice cream. It's still, a bunch of chemicals that are there that to imitate ice cream but don't actually do the job. There's nothing you could do to fix it. Okay, let's see what Rava says. Omar Rava, Haiman Davad Chavita. There's a man who builds a barrel. Why do you build a barrel? Anybody build a barrel before? Used to be that's what you had to do. Well, they used to have so that the Children's Museum, I think here in Jerusalem and other places, actually have an exercise show kids how to build a barrel. They show kids how to build an arch so that it doesn't collapse, and how to build a barrel using the metal ring and all that. So it's kind of fun. He says here, yeah, so you don't have to use wood. Okay, why are you making this out of cheres? Well, there's different pieces. And Rashi is going to say he has his own list of what malachas a person violates here. He says, Chayav mishum sheva chataot. If you're to do this unwittingly, it's 7 counts, 7 different prohibited labors on Shabbos. And we're going to go through Rashi's way, as has been pointed out. Meiri and others count differently. I guess they're thinking about what kind of chavit are we using. So we'll stick with Rashi because that's what's on the page, and everybody learns Rashi. He adds Tanura chayav bishum shmona chataot. If a person were to build an oven, what kind of oven? The kind they used to use in the olden days. So he would be hit with 8 counts, 8 violations. And what does Abaye say? Omar Abaye Haiman De'avad Chalta Chayav Achat Esrei Chatot. A person who makes a chalta. What's a chalta? That's a wicker basket. Kaveret shel kanim, Rashi says. Kaveret sometimes means beehive. If you let bees do their thing, their hive will take a natural shape. That's what Rashi calls a kaveret. But if you take reeds and make a basket out of it, add it in the shape that looks like a beehive, it's also called a kaveret. Okay, so Abaye is saying that he could do this. He could violate 11 times. And if you were to sew up the mouth of this basket, then he would be hit with 13 counts, 13 violations. So it's when the cop's writing the ticket, you see he'd have to, delineate exactly what he did wrong and show it. So let's read Rashi over here. He says, Chavita of cheres, of earthenware. Anybody here ever make earthenware from scratch? No, you can't just use any old dirt. You need actually clay to do it. Where do you get clay from? Certain places. Sheva chataoth. Rashi says, tochein harigavim. First, he grinds up the clods of earth. You have to find the right type of earth to do this. I saw that the one guy who did this, he wetted it and he was strained it a certain way. Certain minerals make up the clay component of the earth, and certain don't. It's not exactly soil. V'shochatan hadek. And then he grinds them up nice and fine. That's the act of grinding, tochein. Uvorer hatzroroth hagasot. He picks out the large pebbles. That's borer. Oh boy. So how many? Someone should be counting. Tell me when we get to 7. He takes out the large tzrot mitochan harei shtayim. So there's 2 melachas right there. He says tochein and borer so far. Next, umarkidin binafeh umgabel hatit. Then he, I guess he doesn't strain it necessarily, but he sifts it. Okay, he uses a sifter to do this, and the nafa is also that's a sifter. Umgabel hatit. Then he kneads this into a mud, or in this case, it's more of a clay. Dahainu lush, and then that's considered kneading. And if you would do this with, let's say, flour and water, that'd be making a dough. But in this case, he's making a muddy substance here. Umimareach hatit kishoseh hagolem, and then he smooths it out when he makes the form of this earthenware. He said it here. It's going to be a cask or a barrel. The golem means the raw form of the something, just like a golem in in the Agadic literature. By Agadic, I don't mean Talmudic Agadic, I mean fiction created hundreds of years after the fact about the Maharal. The golem is basically form of man, but no soul. So in this case, it's the form of this earthenware pot, but it doesn't exist yet. In order that it should be smooth. Why is he smoothing it? To get the smooth result. So that's the Melacha of Memachek. Et ha'ur b'kivshon. And then he fires the fire, makes it burn inside the kiln. Umitzarafo b'tocho harim vashel. And then he actually puts it into the kiln. He fires it in there, and that is considered an act of cooking. Ooh, an act of cooking. Rashi says it's an act of cooking. What's he doing? He's taking this clay, which he can still mold, and he's causing it to become what? Hard. So if Rashi's consistent, Rashi means, well, first it actually softens a little bit in the oven. He's trying to expel the water and form it to clay. So if Rashi is consistent with himself, he means that this is an act of bishul because as part of the process, the clay becomes even softer. I don't know how that's possible, but I guess that's what he assumes. He doesn't assume that it just starts hardening, like the hardness level is a linear progression as time goes on. It actually goes like a little bit less hard and then starts to harden. Why? Rashi said so earlier. So he says, what about the fact that he dug in the ground to get out the clay? Rashi doesn't count that. Why not? Because that was the whole point. He was trying to get the dirt that he's digging out. The actual malacha of digging is to create the hole. But if he actually is digging in order to obtain that material, that's not a chiyuv. It's still forbidden to do so on Shabbos, but it's not the malacha legufa, as Rashi says elsewhere. Any questions about Rashi's count over here? Anybody disagree with Rashi? No? Okay, well, Tosfos will disagree in a minute, but let's get to the next Rashi.
He's allowed to use the name.
Yeah, well, Anicles, yeah, a number of them. There's also a few of Rashi's sons-in-law mentioned here. Okay. Rashi continues. Let me make this bigger for those watching. Oh, we should put this on the screen. I'm so sorry. Those watching at home don't see what I'm talking about. They can't read Rashi with me. Here. Good, that should be visible. Here we go. Rashi's over here. Chayav shmona. Person's building an oven. It's an oven. What they used to use to make ovens back in the day. Rashi will explain. 8 counts. What? Clay. Also clay. Good. So Rashi's explain. Delachar setzarafo b'kishan hu tachalav tefela. So Rashi first says tanur chayav shmone. He doesn't say tanura. He says tanur, and basically says you pick up with the chavit. So you must be using clay. Everything we said before about making this cask, but the oven's much bigger, but it's similar. After he fires it in the kiln, hu tachalav tefela, he puts on some more clay, but in this case it's called tefela. Why? It's insulating the outside. Okay? The inside has to function as an oven, but the oven, so it doesn't lose heat, and also, so I guess you could touch it from the outside. He puts on what's called tefela, which just is an extra layer, but it's not baked on like the rest. She'av, in order so that it be thick. Mechumo mitkayin. What we would say is thickening it on the outside in order that it's insulated. Anybody ever do this before? Okay, we had some neighbors who actually did this. They wanted to bake matzah the old-fashioned way. I got them all into make your own matzah day. So they said, okay, instead of doing the grill method that we were using, they wanted to build their own oven. So they went to the farm and they actually did this. Vihu gemar melachto, and that's the gemar melacha. Oh, gemar melacha. What do we call that? Makah b'patish. V'amrin l'kaman, we say on page 75, kol midei dahavi gemar melacha chayav mishu makeh b'fatish. Whatever is the finishing touch on what someone's building or making, his craft, so that's called makeh b'fatish, which is an expression taken from the finishing touch that, let's say, the smith does with the hammer. So that becomes an expression for any finishing touch, even if you're not using a hammer and you're not a smith. If this is the last stage, so that's considered a melacha, even though, technically speaking, just sticking on clods of earth onto something or some more clay just to insulate is not in and of itself a melacha. If this was not the end stage, but he's just doing it, maybe you wouldn't be hit with a melacha. But because this is the end stage, it is a melacha, even though from an objective standpoint, it would not have been if it weren't the end stage. Okay, let's see here. Aval gabe chavit leka mishum akeba fatish deme alei nigmara melachto batanur. He didn't count number 8 with making this cask. Why? Because its finishing touch is the last stage where it's being baked in the oven. The guys, or in the kiln, sorry. Is that the right word? What's the word for when you put pottery in the kiln? It's not a form of baking. Is that the word they use? Well, yeah, but I used the verb fire in order to make that fire. Lavir. I know it. I'm saying I want more words to have, like, to distinguish it. Firing the kiln means, making it nice and hot by giving it the fuel. And in the kiln also. Okay, I guess we're missing a word. Here in Hebrew, there's about 7 different words for picking different fruits, right? So we should have that. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Rashi's going to talk about the chalta. Chalta on the second white line of Rashi, the wicker basket. Kaveret shel kanim chayav shmona achad esrei, which means 11 counts of violating Shabbos. He says zomer kanim. Oh, first he has to, of course, pick these kanim. He has to find the reeds that he's using. He cuts them off from where they're growing. He uses the word zmira, not lakita, not kitifa, zomer. Why? All the words I had mentioned for picking are for picking things that are edible. But these reeds are not food in any way. So this is the word for pruning, basically trimming them off from where they're growing because they're just, just pieces of, I guess, vegetation he's using to create something. Well, yeah, it doesn't kill it, of course. Most things actually you do that. There's except for wheat. When they reap the wheat, you don't get a second crop afterwards. You have to replant it. But when you trim a tree, you prune your tree or whatever it is, or we grow. What do we use for making crafts around the house? We grow bamboo, and that's really fun. Eventually, it'll take over your yard. So always around before Sukkot time, that's when I go do zmira on the bamboo, and have extra material with which to build the sukkah. It's quite nice. Ud sarich lahem. So he actually needs it. Normally, if his zmira he's not using the wood. So that's once again a Melacha she'eina tzricha legufa. But in this case, he's actually using the wood. Hayav mishum kotzer. So that is a tolda of kotzer. Kotzer, we said, was reaping wheat. So this is a tolda. Umishum notea. Okay, and also for planting. Hold on one second. Umishum notea aspas yachad harezim me'amer. No, it says here umishum notea. The second one. Let's see something here. Kotzer umishum notea. I don't think this would be I have here a samich. I don't think it should be a samich. Yeah, it's a mem sofit. Okay. I was reading it wrong. It says also bishum notea. He's planting. Why? Because he planted these things in order that they should grow. I don't know why you didn't mention notea first. It should be notea and then kotzer. You have to first plant in order to let it grow. Okay, we're counting. Isafam yachad harezim amer. And then he gathers it. That's amer. Normally, amer is gathering, let's say, the food that he reaped into a pile. But in this case, he's gathering the reeds that he's going to use to make the basket. Birer yafoth harezim borer. He chooses the good ones, the nice ones for making this weave. So that is selecting. Hechlikan harezim memachek. He smooths them out. So that's melach. That's memachek. Asa'an dakot. Hold on one second. He made them nice and thin. Me'achas shtaim o shalosh. He separates them. From one, he makes 2 or 3. And by the way, anybody ever weaved lulav branches? What do we use for lulav? The basket that they give you. People don't use those here anymore. It used to be you stick your lulav in a basket, and on the right, you have room for your hadassim, on the left for the aravos. What is that basket made out of? Anybody ever make it? Well, it's made out of the lulav, the same one. When they cut your lulav, sometimes the lulav is cut from the bottom, so a lot of leaves come off. Each one of those leaves is separable into 2. And they actually use those leaves to make those baskets and also the ties that they put around the lulav. If you don't want to use, like Rabbi Wasserman used to use the rubber bands, so you use those. Those are made from the lulav themselves. So Rashi says you could take these reeds and separate each one to 1 or 2. So that's tochein. Wow. See, separating the leaves 1 into 2 in order to be able to build with them, put them together, that's like tochein. Chatachan b'midah harezim mechatech. He cuts them to size, so that's the Melacha of cutting them to size. Hesich hashesi hareza mesich. He sets up the ones that are, I guess, shesi and erev means that when he's weaving anything, they're the ones that go in this direction, the ones that go 90 degrees to them. So he sets those up. That's mesich, setting up the weave. Arag achat lamala v'achat lamata kedei lamido hareo sesh debatei nirim. He puts one above and one below. That's why you have to start the weave. There's like a base there. So that's like making the two batei nirim. Anybody ever do this? Rashi's referring to something that you do with a loom, and you have to start somewhere on the loom. So that's called the two batei nirim, the original ones. Arag hareze orig, and then he actually weaves it. That's the malacha of weaving. Gatach lachar arigata kedei lashvota hareze makev hatish, and then he cuts it after he weaves it, cuts along the edge in order to make it nice and even. That's the finishing touch, the makev b'fatish, but in this case he's using his scissors. So that's the 11th malacha. Kanamrino, come on. As we say later, page, once again, ayin hey, beis. Haiman, the shakil, akufe, miglime, chayav, mishuma, kebef fatish, harei, achadisrei. There's a person who takes off the akife miglime. Glime sometimes means a cape or his coat. It was woven, and it was created as a whole cloth, and he wants to smooth out the edge, so he cuts off the threads that are hanging off at the edge. That's considered the finishing touch, even though he's not cutting to size. Whatever is the finishing touch in creating these things. So there you have it. That's a malacha. Rashi continues, and if he were to sew up its mouth, la sot la safa, he wants to make an edge. I guess it's the hem of the basket. Okay, we don't make baskets. Isn't there a basket? The women do a basket weaving thing here sometimes. They have a hook for that. And the other shul, they were doing it. Okay, children do this. So, well. Okay, well, sometimes even before you get to the old age home, people like doing it. Okay. So this involves sewing and also tying. Because you have to tie knots in order to keep what you've sewn in place. They usually go together. Now Rashi says, this is the part where the arguments begin, at least on the page. You can't hit him with a violation for actual construction, boneh, not mached b'padish, but actually building, okay? Making a kli from scratch. Why? Lo b'chavit, v'lo b'tanur, v'lo b'kaveret. None of these three things we're describing now, not with the barrel, not with the oven, not with this wicker basket. De'ein binyan b'chilim. It says later, general principle, the law of that prohibits construction on Shabbos is referring to structures and not referring to implements, kelim. He says here, he also continues. So that's going to be the first argument. There's a period, they added, Rashi has a period in these new editions. So that's one statement. Mafshi leko lemeimar bekanim, dein hafshata ela be'or. And also you can't say that you're skinning these reeds. Why? Even though you do take off an outer layer of them. That also with bamboo, by the way, there's a lot. If you pick bamboo, so you have to take off the green leaves that are on the outside. So that's not considered skinning. Why? Because the malacha of skinning only exists if you're dealing with something that has actual skin, a living animal. Okay? So if you were skinning a behemoth that had been shechted, that would be the malacha that Rashi says of mafshi. But when you're referring to vegetation, there's no such thing. V'yesh mefarashim shekodeach nekavim ba'etz. Some say that they actually would drill holes in the wood, right? Drilling holes in the wood. Shetochavin bo rashi akanim shel shesi. You need holes in this in some of the reeds because that's where you're putting the head, the top of some of the reeds of the shesi. Those are the first, I guess, the ones that are going in the direction that he starts with, not the ones that are perpendicular to them that he adds afterwards. Okay. So because he's drilling holes, there should be the malacha of tochin in there. Rashi says, "Veloni hirali." Doesn't seem to me to be that way. The drilling the hole creates sawdust, but he's not trying to create the sawdust, he's trying to create the hole. V'tov li lefaresh osel tandakot v'avi kiman desalit silte. Rashi says, it's better for me to explain that he's making them fine, he's chopping the wood fine, making it pieces, just like we saw at the beginning of the page, that if a person were to take firewood, twigs, and break them up into pieces in order to use as firewood, that would be a melacha. Okay. So let's see. What? Mechatich. Tochin, sorry, tochin. Yeah, if you would do such thing, it'd be tochin. That was right at the top of the page here. It says, Hai man de faris silka, and then it says, Hai man de salit silte chayav mishum tochin. And making it into small pieces.
Usable.
Yeah, smaller usable pieces, or you're going to knead them into something else. So let's see here what Tosfos says. This is a major machlokas that actually has halachic implications. Tosfos says in Chavita v'tanura v'chalta regarding this barrel and the oven and the wicker basket. Perish Rashi, the mishum boneh lo michayev, the ein binyan b'chilim. Rashi says you're not going to be hit with the count of just building construction. Why? Because constructing implements is not considered a melacha on Shabbos. It's still forbidden to do so, but it's not the melacha. Ve'ein nira. By the way, if you let's say you would make a shirt or a hammer, there is a melacha involved, just not binyan according to Rashi. Making a shirt would be ariga, weaving, etc., but not building. So ve'ein nira. It doesn't seem to be correct. The dafka b'machazir mita u'menara shel chuliot amrinon de'ein binyan b'chilim. When this statement was made by the sages, they were referring to, let's say, a bed or a lamp. In this case, a menorah means like they used to have. It was a fixture that holds up a number of what you and I call candles. So he says these were made of chuliot, separable pieces. Something that you could actually build yourself. They have like the type of things you get from IKEA, but even now in IKEA you have to actually screw things in and all that. Imagine something that was entirely interchangeable parts. You could take it apart and put it back together. For something like that, you'd have no binyan. But if you'd actually build a bed that cannot be taken back apart, so that would be an act of building on the Sabbath. The ein binyan b'kilim aval kishosel gamre kol hakli michayev mishum boneh. If a person were to actually build one of these things from scratch, he would be hit with the violation of boneh. So Tosfos must count this differently than Rashi. As it says, Damrinon, Bereish HaBoneh, it says to begin the parak called HaBoneh, Haiman de Ayel Shufta Mikufina, Demara Chayav Mishum Boneh. What's the Shufta de Kufina Demara? Hold on a second. There's a note over here. It's in all the editions. I didn't see this here. Does anybody else have this vav over there? No? Anybody know what I'm talking about? There's something here. Yeah, I have something here. There's Mosaf Tosfos. Oh, look at that. So there's something in this edition that's not in this edition. It's not the exact source of Daf. Okay, so let's see this. I lost the translation of this. He says here. Hold on a second. Okay, it went off the screen. Tosfos does have an example where a person could build something from scratch, and he would be hit with the prohibition of boneh. Well, that's a kli. That's 100% a keli. Okay, so if you would do something, hold on a second. Yes, sir. You have a question? I can hear you.
So I'm puzzled because we hear that the Chazon Ish says for closing a circuit is boneh. This doesn't seem to be according to either Rashi or Tosfos here.
It's not according to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach either. I first heard this from Rabbi Wein. You could see this in the Chazon Ish's biography, that really the Chazon Ish was very concerned about the advent of electricity, making it very easy to just get around all sorts of prohibitions on Shabbos. That, for example, the blech problem. If everybody has a blech on Shabbos, it's very easy, an electrical one, very easy to have hot food and heat things up without all the previous problems we used to have in the olden days. So he said it must be prohibited. You have to try really hard, break your head Talmudically, in order to come up with some sort of justification for prohibiting all use of electricity on Shabbos. So that's what he did. But in Achinami, contemporary Rabbanim actually took the more lenient approach and said that technically speaking, certain forms of electrical use would be permissible on Shabbos. And the only reason, for example, we got used to when electricity was, I guess, new, let's say back in the 1950s. So, I mean, like new, but when people were getting used to everybody having electricity, even in this country, what happened was there were a lot of devices that were operated electrically that are actual melachas. For example, the ubiquitous light switches. Most lights in the olden days, you turn it on, even though using electricity in and of itself might not be prohibited on Shabbos. You're creating a fire or some other melacha inside the filament of that bulb. If you turn on your oven, you're going to be cooking things. If you use your washing machine, you're going to be laundering. So generally speaking, we got used to not using electrical devices, period, on Shabbos. But if we think more objectively, Rabbi Rabinovich and others pointed this out, especially on Yom Tov, the use of electricity in and of itself for that which does no melacha and stays cold should be technically permissible. I'll give you an example. Using a radio, if your radio is working properly, or your telephone, and it's electrical, that does not do any melacha that we could find, and it doesn't get hot. If your radio gets hot, it means there's something malfunctioning. Your radio gets hot enough that hot to the touch, you have a problem. So too with your cellular phone. Technically speaking, they're not prohibited. Or the television, turning on the television does not do a melacha, but we don't want people to have televisions even during the week. But if we tell people, hold on, here, you could turn on your television on Shabbos, or you could use your phone all you want, then that would destroy the atmosphere of Shabbos. Using a blech and a refrigerator and everything that helps with Oneg Shabbos, and the lights, of course, that's good. But that which is Nisht Shabbos, we don't. Hold on, there's a question here. Yes, sir. No, you're just using the kli as it's supposed to be. That's the point. The circuit is just a little tab that closes and opens. So Chazal already said that if you build a device that's supposed to have one state and another state, and it interchanges between them, it's a very easy act. You don't have to actually do anything, like opening the door. This door behind you was put in. Putting the door in its place in the mashkov, in the construction of the synagogue, would have been a malacha. But opening and closing that door with a latch on Shabbos is not. It's doing its normal function. So too, the circuit is meant to be opened and closed many times. Yeah. Yes, like a vessel. Many vessels have a function, like your bottle. If this bottle is amazing because right now it's in the closed way and it does not let the liquid out. But if I were to open it even slightly and then turn it this way, the liquid would come out. But it's still just one bottle. Opening the cap and removing the cap is not considered a malacha. Creating the bottle would have been a malacha. So that's why they disagree with the Chazon Ish. I don't think. Actually, maybe I should be corrected. We could ask Rabbi Rosen. He passed away at Tzomet. They created all those devices for hospitals to use on Shabbos. They rely on the assumption that there's a lot that is actually permissible, not like the Chazon Ish. They always use grama. They want people, even in Bnei Brak, in all the hospitals, to no one should have a problem. No one should come and say, well, I'm machmir like the Chazon Ish. Everything should be perfect. But really, they're doing that as a chumrah. And they're trying to do something that's universal. They don't believe that this is really like that. Yeah. It would be permissible on Shabbos. Not only that, I was surprised. I live among very proud Moroccan rabbis. The problem was this country was controlled by an Ashkenazic establishment that recognized officially, even though if they weren't religious, they said an Ashkenazic rabbi, has a certain look to him. Imagine a Rabbi Lau type or a Rav Kook. That's what an Ashkenazic rabbi should look like. He should be fluent in Hebrew, English, and Yiddish, and he should be of a certain height and have a certain hat and everything. That's an Ashkenazic rabbi. And a Sephardic rabbi should be like that, but also speak Arabic and should have a robe and everything and put on certain airs of a Sephardic chief rabbi. And that's good for all Judaism. But then come Yemenite Jews, and they see we are not represented, and our traditions are not represented by gentlemen like this. It just doesn't fit. And then you get other subgroups, the Moroccans, they call themselves Mughrabim, meaning Westerners in Arabic. They don't exactly do everything like Sephardim. It's actually kind of funny because they're the closest to actual Sfarad. But to call Iraqi Jews who've been in Iraq, like Rabbi Avi Yosef and his family themselves, they've been in Iraq since the destruction of the first temple, and now they come back to Eretz Yisrael. There is no reason that we should call them Spartan. There's nothing Spartic about them. They've never been there before. We're closer to Sparta genetically and historically than they are. The Rambam, he's a Sparti. The Beis Yosef, he's a Sparti. They came from Spain, but the rest of us not. So these Muhrabi rabbis, they have their own opinions and they do not follow, let's say, the rabbinic establishment of the Rabbanut. So they don't call themselves Spartan, and they have their own traditions. So I live among them. For example, among all these Muhrabi rabbis, the idea that you could tell Jews it's forbidden to go onto the Temple Mount is entirely foreign to them. They all go. They all have been going. They've all been saying such a thing. So I learned just a few weeks ago, our local proud Moroccan rabbis also say that the use of electricity on Shabbos around the home, on Yom Tov, is entirely permissible. They, in their own houses, they turn on lights and they turn on the oven. They'll do anything. Anything like electrical, permissible on Yom Tov. Why? Because whichever way you push it, the electricity is already there. It's just like lighting fire from that which is already burning on Yom Tov. So they're very lenient. And by the way, it turns out there were closeted Ashkenazic rabbis in, let's say, New York in the olden days who did such things also. They believed this likewise. It wasn't the mainstream opinion. And by the way, I don't think this is, I wouldn't tell people, yes, go have fun with electricity in your house on Shabbos. Why? Because you're dealing with women and children also, and they don't know the difference between Shabbos and Yontif. At least with Yontif, they know what's the difference. They cook, as long as they're not making a new fire, so they cook on Yontif. But to tell them, listen, that there's even more of a distinction between the two, they will get confused. Children don't know this distinction. They think Yontif treat it like Shabbos, and that's the way you're supposed to, unless it's for Yontif purposes. So just laissez-faire, use the lights. That's a little bit, I think, a little bit too much. But yeah, in Achinami, I don't think that this whole circuit thing. I'm sorry I didn't give a proper translation for this over here, but the point is that Tosfos does say that there are cases where a person actually is building something. I'm trying to figure this out. I forgot this. Totally went blank on what Tosfos was trying to say here. He continues, "V'tzarich iyun delo likshe miminapeach bechli zechuchit the sof berkin." Also, he wonders why it's not considered a minapeach bechli zechuchit. You could have asked Akasha, "You're blowing glass. Anybody here ever blow glass before?" Yeah, well, is anybody here a glass blower? So that's creating kalim. Why is this not addressed? So it's a good kasha on Rashi. So because we introduced Rashi and Tosfos in their individual opinions, we should see what the Rambam brings, which is because you're creating a kli. And they mentioned this. There are certain kinds of boneh. Okay. Yeah, he says no boneh by kalim, period. And Tosfos says it's not exactly true. Depends on the type of kli. What does Rambam say? I'll read you Tosfos' distinction. So Tosfos says kli is boneh. You make a kli out of scratch. No, not every kli. If it's the kind where it has parts, it's been designed to come apart and be put back together, then that's not boneh. That's the not boneh b'kalim. Putting together that which was meant to be put together. So you could have, let's say, Tosfos says, you have a bed or a chair made of different parts that you put together. My daughter used to have a kiddie table. What is it? It's the top of the table and 4 legs. So we put in the closet when we were getting in the way, but she wanted to sit and eat on it, take out the chair, the table, put it right together. So that would be ein binyan b'kalim. That's what Tosfos is referring to. Yeah. Yes. Yes, it would be. So Tosfos has a different count. You could see that, maybe we should bring this in next time. We'll see the different counts. Anybody here Steinsaltz has a good collection of the way it's counted. Entirely different than Rashi. So yeah, the Meiri also. Sorry, Chiyun. Hold on a second. Well, let's read what Rambam says here. Rambam says, "Nuchas Shabbos haboneh al gabe kelim patur." If a person were to actually construct a structure on top of kalim, that is, he's building his tent not directly on the ground, but instead he's building it on top of, I don't know, something that's kalim. It's not in the actual ground, on chairs, tabletop. Yeah, but that's actually considered a kli. So that's putter. You still can't do it. You still can't erect the tent that way. but you shouldn't be doing it on Shabbos. You're not going to get punished. V'chein ha'oseh klei adama kigon tanur v'chavit kodem she'yisarfu. A person makes klei adama, things made from the ground, earthenware. He's referring to, he says specifically, a barrel or an oven before he fires them, before he actually puts them in also in their own kiln in order to harden them. Harei toledet boneh v'chayav. Making this kli, he holds like not like Rashi. Rambam says that the act of forming these the barrel and the oven out of the earthenware while it's still malleable, so that's a form of boneh. And then when he burns it, that would be like the makah b'patish, or that would be the mavashal stage. Okay? That's how Rambam holds. Rambam holds that there is a prohibition also of binyan b'kelim, making it from scratch. But if you take it, if it's the kind of kli that could be taken apart and put back together, that's what it was meant to be. So there is no melacha. Good. Let's continue in the Gemara, unless there's more questions we have here. Okay. What about shearing sheep? I actually went to a place, I saw them doing this. Nowadays, we don't do it. We use wool. Wool is still used quite a lot. For the fanciest clothing, we still make it out of wool. Why do we make it out of wool? Well, it's still better. We haven't created a synthetic material to properly replace wool yet. With regards to other things, the more common ones, we already replaced them, but not wool itself. The best suits, and of course your talisim, are made out of wool. And by the way, they're also dry clean only. How did they clean such things, wool, before they had dry cleaning? I don't know. Yeah, you have to wash it, but it doesn't come out the same way. Okay, so here we have wash them. I guess, but still, it would probably be really difficult. So the Mishnah mentioned a person who shears the wool and then he whitens it. In this case, it means an elementary washing of the wool. And that's the next stage. Amar Rabba Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hatawet Semer Sha'al Gabei Behima B'Shabbat Chayav Shalosh Chataot. Oh, it's in this week's parsha. Rabbi Yochanan said that if a person were to spin the wool while it's still on the animal on Shabbos, he has violated 3 different melachas. What was the question? Okay, please.
Made the rules for the Mishnah do that. That's fantastic ability to actually, while we're still on the animal.
When we were learning this parak with Rabbi Braunspiegel back in 2005, I had a very similar question around this daf, and he told me I could tell you didn't read the next 2 lines in the Gemara, because that's 2 lines below us in the Gemara, right there. Okay, so it says achat mishum gozes, 1 for shearing, v'achat mishum menapetz, 1 for combing the wool, v'achat mishum towen, 1 for spinning the wool. Rav Kahana Amar, ein derech geziza b'chach, ein derech menapetz b'chach, vein derech tawi b'chach. Rabbi Yochanan, I disagree with you. That's not how you shear sheep. You first have to shear them. You don't spin it and then shear them. That's not how you comb out the wool, and that's not how you spin the wool. So hold on a second. That's what he says. Velo, and then they challenge Rav Kahana. I think Rabbi Yochanan is what solid ground. He read this week's parsha and he read Rashi. V'atanya doesn't say in the brisa Mishmei de Rabbi Nechemia shatof ba'izim with tavo ba'izim. It had been basically washed while it's still on the izim. The goat hairs. Goats don't have wool; they have hair. But goat hair was used as a material to make fabric. So it had been washed. Somehow or other, the women were doing this, washed the goats so that their hair is already clean for use. With Tawobazim, they even spun it while still on the goats. Alma, so this midrashic teaching shows us Tuwiya Gabe Behema Shema Tuwiya. So spinning, let's say the wool as an example, or the other thing, washing the hair on the goats and then spinning the hair, and only once it's a complete product, actually detaching it from the goat, that's considered an act, the same act of spinning that you would do when it's detached. And the Gemara's response is, or Rav Kahana's voice would respond, Chochma Yithera Shane. No, this is a Chachma Yisera. This is an exceptional act that they did. It is not the usual, so we can't learn anything from it. Okay, so what do we hold bottom line? Well,
Goats, not sheep.
Well, Well, goats and sheep, it would be the same thing, the same din. Okay, you have to the goat hairs, the goats, you have to first shear them, and then you have to wash the hairs, and you have to spin them. You get a different material than wool, but the act is the same. Functionally, there's no difference. What animal did they not take the hair off to use? What animal's hair wasn't used? Let's say what? What was that? No, I'm saying what in the olden days when they had animals around, there was an animal that was quite common, but they did not use its hair for any real specific purpose. We're talking about cows and bulls. The Gemara talks about, we saw this yesterday in Hilchos Me'ilah. It says, the examples in the pasuk are, you can't put your ox to work if it's a holy ox, if it's kodesh, and you can't shear its wool if it's a sheep. Oh, but what if you're going to shear the ox? It does have hair, it's a little bit hairy, or you're going to put your sheep to work. Well, why would people shear the ox? Because no one shears an ox. If you have an ox or cow and you're trying to get its hair for any use, it's too fine, it's useless. As a matter of fact, when that ox meets its maker, what do you do with its skin? The major melacha is removing the hair so that you could use the skin for whatever purpose you use. The hair is almost useless. And say, well, make it talis big. Okay, fine. Or sometimes it's artificial, by the way. Look at that. They changed it around. It's not really useful. Or a person would say, instead of having the ox pull the plow, I'll make a bunch of sheep pull the plow. Can sheep pull a plow? Absolutely not. A sheep is so weak. It's not good for any burden whatsoever, even carrying things. You could barely use, as I'll say, maybe you could have the lamb carry the knife into the temple for you. But that's it, right? But if a person in Nachinami were to shear his bull or his ox and try to use the hairs for something, or put his sheep to work, that would be considered an act. But they didn't do such a thing. So the point is, Chazal normally talk about what's the regular derech of doing things, and it's the sheep and the goats contribute their hair, and the cows and the bulls, they donate their skin. Okay, so let's see the next one here. Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught us. Wait, hold on, Tosfos, we skipped it. Chachma Yasei Rashani. Ve'osimota batla datam eitzel kol adam. If you actually have people who today were to go over to a goat and wash the goat well and start spinning the goat's hair and combing out the hair and doing this act of beginning to weave it, already still attached to the goat, that would not count because those people are just being too eccentric. Anybody does anything highly unusual doesn't count. As it says in the Matzliah, Gabe Anshe Hutzal. Anshe Hutzal, with their means of heating up the water in a funny way, they were doing things different, so they weren't necessarily an example of a normal way to do Melacha. That's the unusual way of doing the Melacha. Let's see over here. What?
Using solar heat.
Using solar heat is a derech, but it's not what was forbidden in the temple because that's just not what was used. There was no fire involved. Okay, God contributes the heat, so you could take advantage of that, or using volcanic heat. The rabbis teach in the brisa, "Hatoleish et kanaf v'kotimo v'amorito chayav." Person takes out a feather from an animal, toleish the kanaf, and then he cuts it a little bit at the top of morito, and he takes off the little feather parts. The feather is the main quill on the bottom, but towards the edge, it's actually fluffy hair-like stuff. You play with feathers, you could see it. Those are the three things he could do with the feather in order to make a quill. Chayav shalosh chataot, hit with 3 different liabilities. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, toleish chayav mishum gozes. Taking the quill off out of the animal is like shearing an animal. Quills aren't exactly like hair. Where are they made out of, by the way? Like chitin or something like that? Similar to the material of keratin or chitin. They're made similar to what we have in our nails. Okay, so it's not a hair, but you could pull them off of birds. Koteim chayav mishum chatech. Cutting off the top or cutting the edge of this feather is like cutting to size. And when he takes off the little wispy parts of the feather, so that's like smoothing. When a person smooths the animal hide, like we said before, to try to remove all the little hairs. And next melacha is mentioned in the Mishnah where kosher matir, tying and undoing the knot. Matir, by the way, is not used in the Torah to mean permitting something. Rabbi Fisher likes to joke about this. The idea that which is forbidden is called asur. What does asur mean in biblical Hebrew? To David HaMelech's ears, it means tied up, and mutar means untied. So Chazal use these expressions to mean that which is forbidden and that which is permissible, even though literally they don't mean that. So the guy has the dog, he wants to bring it onto the train. So the rule is the dog has to be on a leash. So if it's asur, mutar, the dog is tied up, so mutar to bring on the dog, permissible. Mutar, but if the dog is not tied up, asur, forbidden to bring the dog onto the train. Okay. Kshiraba mishkan hechahava. What were they tying in the Mishkan? Were they tying knots in the Mishkan? Yeah, let's see. So they say, Amar Rava, Sheken koshrim bitidot oalim. Okay. So what do you mean? They tied the Ol Moed was tied down to pegs. Pegs go into the ground. You've seen pictures of it. The Ol Moed, what makes it stick to the to the walls, the crushim. So it must have been tied down to the ground. That's so everybody's seen the classic circus tent is done that way until today, right? Use pegs. So they said that doesn't work. Hahu kosher al manat la tirhu. What Rava you're describing is something that's supposed to be temporary. That's not a permanent knot because they tie it down today and they're going to untie it tomorrow. Every time they pitch the tent, they're going to make a new knot. El Amar Abaye shekain or geiriot and if sakalahen nima koshrinota. If you were one of the weavers of the sections of the main part of the Mishkan, what's called the Yeriot of the Mishkan. It says they made all of them of a certain size, then they wove them together. So when they're doing this, the actual weaving of them, sometimes a thread snaps, so they tie it back up right in the middle and then continue. Amar le Rava teratsta kosher matir ma'igel lememar. Okay, good. So you found an example of them making permanent knots in the construction of the tabernacle. But would they ever untie such a thing? They have to come in a pair. There has to be tying and untying. If you're going to say di'imit ramele trechute kitre badade shari chad v'katar chad, you're going to say sometimes this happens to two nearby ones. So he'll tie two together, or sometimes he'll open up one so he could tie it with the next one. That I don't weave that much, but apparently this is something you could do. It's a trick that they had. He says, yeah, but this trick won't result in a high quality weave. If you're making something for the king, you're trying to weave him this nice robe or whatever it is, and you use this trick to untie certain threads in the weave and tie them together, you'd notice there's a little imperfection there. You wouldn't do this. Kal v'chomer, you shouldn't do it in front of the King of Kings. Would you do such a thing in making the Mishkan? It's low quality weave. Ella Amar Rava, V'itema Rabbi Ilai. They don't know to whom to attribute the statement. Shekain Tzadei Chilazon Kosherin Umatirin. Those who were catching the snails with which to make the tcheles and the argamon, what they used to do, they had to tie knots and untie knots. Why? To make nets. They use ropes to make nets. Anybody ever make a net out of rope? That's what they used to do. They had to. There's still fishermen who use such things. What's the kasha with this bottom line, though? That's what they did. For the construction of the Mishkan, they started tying up nets and they headed over to the Mediterranean Sea and they started catching chelzonot. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. That means they got to Eretz Yisrael to do it. Where do they do that? You can't even do it in Gaza, by the way. Derech Eretz Plishtim. There's no tcheles and argamon there. Where did they find these creatures, and where historically have they been? The more northern coasts of Eretz Yisrael, starting around the Netanya area, and as you go farther toward Akko and Beirut and places like that, that's where you're going to find these creatures they used to make this. So what are they talking about over here? Whoever was making the tcheles, of course, had to pull it out of the sea, so that's what they did it. But even though the Israelites themselves probably did not do this, they had, says, who brought the tcheles and argamon? Whoever had it, whoever nimtza ito. Yeah, and that's what it says in the Parsha. We read in Vayakil, it doesn't say that they did any of the dyeing themselves. All the dyed wool, by the way, tcheles argamon tula shani are all wool. They're just dyed with different colors. One's blue, one's purple, and one's red. So where'd they get it from? Whoever had. Why? Because from a practical standpoint, they did not make any new tcheles in the Midbar at the foot of Mount Sinai because they could not. There's no way they could actually catch the chelzonot. They traded from Goyim who were making this. Can Goyim make tcheles? The answer is yes. Okay, it doesn't have to be. You learn from here that sometimes the Goyim do it. You have to make sure they're not cheating you somehow, but they're the ones who are in charge of it. It used to be not necessarily a Jewish thing to make the tcheles. We would buy the tcheles, but we wouldn't be making the tcheles.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.